The torsion spring snapped with a violence that felt personal. It wasn't just a mechanical failure. It was a gunshot in the sanctuary of the suburbs. Layla stood next to her silver Audi, keys in hand, heart hammering against the silk of her blouse. The garage door, usually a silent servant, hung crooked and dead in its tracks, sealing her inside. Outside, the storm battered the aluminum roof, a relentless drumbeat against her sudden isolation. She checked her watch, 8:42 a.m. The board meeting started in 48 minutes. She was trapped in a concrete box of her own making. Then, headlights cut through the gloom of the driveway, followed by the heavy, reassuring rumble of a diesel engine. The side door opened, letting in a gust of wind that smelled of wet asphalt and ozone. I expected a mechanic, someone who would apologize for the delay, someone I could manage with a sharp tone and a checkbook. Instead, Sam walked in. She was a steady in utility, a sharp contrast to the sterile, white-walled perfection of my garage. She wore Carhartt canvas that had softened with use, the color of wet sand, and heavy boots that left dark, deliberate prints on the epoxy floor. She didn't announce herself. She didn't apologize for the storm. She just occupied the space, her presence instantaneous and heavy, displacing the air I was trying to breathe. "You're the homeowner?" she asked. Her voice was low, a rough texture that scraped pleasantly against the silence. She dropped a heavy canvas tool bag onto the floor with a metallic clatter. "I need this open," I said, crossing my arms, the tailored wool of my blazer tightening. "Now. I have a board meeting in less than an hour." Sam didn't look at her watch. She looked at the door. She walked past me, close enough that I caught the scent of her. Not cologne, but something elemental. Rain, cold metal, and the faint, earthy smell of grease. It was an intrusion. My house smelled of lemon verbena and filtered air. Sam smelled like the world outside, the messy, chaotic world I paid good money to keep at bay. "It's a broken torsion spring," she said, looking up at the heavy coil above the door. She reached up, her jacket riding up slightly to reveal a thermal shirt that clung to a back broad enough to carry the weight of the steel door. And the cable jumped the drum. "If I force it open now, the door drops, and your Audi becomes a convertible." "I don't care about the mechanics," I snapped. "Can you fix it in 20 minutes? Sam finally turned to look at me. Her eyes were dark, steady, and completely unimpressed by my panic. She wiped a smudge of rain from her forehead with the back of a glove. "I can fix it fast, or I can fix it so it doesn't kill you next time you pull in. You want precision, or you want speed?" The question hung there. In my world, speed was the currency. We moved fast, we broke things, we fixed them in post. But looking at Sam, standing solid in her heavy boots, holding a pair of winding bars like they were extensions of her own hands, I realized that my currency held no value here. "Precision," I conceded, the word feeling foreign in my mouth. "Good choice." She turned back to the work, dismissing me. I should have gone inside. I should have called an Uber, called my assistant, fired off emails. But I didn't. I stood by the hood of my car, watching her. She set up a ladder, the aluminum legs scraping against the floor. The sound was harsh, violent. She climbed it with a fluid, easy grace that shouldn't have been possible in those boots. As she rose above me, the dynamic in the room shifted. She was elevated, in control of the heavy, dangerous tension of the spring. I was grounded, useless, watching the way her thigh muscles flexed against the canvas as she braced herself. The garage, usually a place of transit, had become a stage. The rain hammered against the door she was fighting to tame, and for the first time in years, the silence of my house felt lonely compared to the noise she was making. I watched her hands, gloved and capable, testing the tension of the steel. They were hands that knew how to touch things without breaking them, or perhaps knew exactly how to break them to make them right again. "You're going to want to step back," she called down, not looking at me. "When I unwind this, it releases a lot of energy. If it slips, it takes fingers with it." "I'm fine where I am," I said, holding my ground. It was a petty defiance, a need to reclaim some territory in my own home. Sam looked down then. The angle was severe. She looked at me from the height of the ladder, her gaze heavy, assessing. "Suit yourself," she said softly, "but don't say I didn't warn you about the tension." The garage became a chamber of echoes. Every movement Sam made was deliberate, a conversation between steel and muscle that reverberated off the concrete walls. She was working overhead now, her boots locked onto the rungs of the ladder, her body extended in a line of pure functional tension. I retreated to the small workbench in the corner, the only surface not covered in the debris of my neglect, and opened my laptop. The screen glowed with the comforting, sterile blue of a spreadsheet, a world I understood. Rows, columns, predictable outcomes. But the numbers wouldn't hold still. My gaze was a traitor. It bypassed the safety of the quarterly projections to trace the line of Sam's reach. She was wrestling with the torsion tube, a heavy, unforgiving pipe that held the weight of the entire door. It wasn't graceful in the way a dancer is graceful. It was the raw, gritty elegance of physics applied by force. I watched the fabric of her thermal shirt strain against her shoulders as she leveraged the bar. The movement pulled the hem up just an inch, exposing a strip of skin at her lower back, pale, vulnerable, disappearing into the waistband of her canvas pants. It was a flash of softness in a room dominated by hard edges, and I found myself staring at it with a focus that made my breath catch. The violence of the repair was jarring. Metal shrieked against metal as she forced the cable back into its groove. It was a harsh, industrial sound that should have been annoying, but in the quiet humidity of the storm-sealed garage, it felt strangely rhythmic. I typed a sentence, deleted it, and typed it again. Please find attached the revised budget. It felt absurdly small compared to the woman currently suspending gravity 10 feet away from me. Sam grunted, a low sound of exertion, and the cable snapped into place with a dull thud. She paused, resting her forehead against the cool metal of the track for a second, her chest heaving slightly. I saw the rise and fall of her breath, the way her grip on the ladder tightened until her knuckles turned white. She was working hard, sweating in the damp cold, while I stood there in my silk blouse, shivering from a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. She began to descend. Her movements were controlled, checking each step before committing her weight. When her boots hit the concrete, she didn't immediately step away. She turned, wiping her hands on a rag she pulled from her back pocket. The grease left dark streaks on the red cloth. She walked toward me, bringing the smell of the work with her, that sharp, metallic tang of old oil and the heat of a body in motion. The torque was off, she said, stopping just outside my personal space. She gestured with the rag toward the ceiling. Whoever installed this wound it too tight. They tried to compensate for a heavy door with extra tension. It works for a while, but eventually the metal gets tired. It remembers the stress. It remembers? I asked, closing my laptop. The screen went black, leaving me with nothing to hide behind. Metal has a memory, Sam said, her voice dropping a register. She looked at me, really looked at me, her eyes dark and unblinking. You force it into a shape it doesn't want to hold, and it holds it. It holds it for years. But the stress is always there, waiting for a weak moment to snap back. That's what you heard. The memory of the metal finally giving up. The words felt heavy, loaded with a subtext I wasn't sure she intended. Or maybe she did. I felt a flush rise in my neck, a heat that had no place in a conversation about garage doors. I was the metal. I was the one wound too tight, holding a shape that wasn't mine, waiting for the snap. So, is it fixed? I asked, my voice steady but thin. The spring is reset, she said, tossing the rag onto the workbench next to my computer. The contrast, the dirty, oil-stained cloth next to the sleek aluminum technology, was stark. But we have a problem with the vertical track. The snap twisted the steel near the roller. If I run the door now, it'll derail again in a week. I can't do this again in a week, I said, and the desperation in my tone was real. I know, Sam said. She stepped closer, invading the buffer zone I kept around myself like a force field. She reached past me to grab a flashlight from the bench, her arm brushing against the sleeve of my blazer. The contact was brief, accidental, but it sent a static shock through me that made my fingers twitch. That's why I need to replace the whole vertical section. I have the part in the truck. It's heavy, it's going to take time, and it's going to be loud. You might want to go inside. No, I said, the refusal immediate. I didn't want to go back to the silent, empty house. I wanted to stay here, in the noise and the grease, watching her hands fix the things I couldn't. I'll stay, in case you need access to something. Sam smiled then, a small, crooked thing that didn't quite reach her eyes, but softened the hard line of her jaw. She knew. She knew I wasn't staying for the supervision. "Suit yourself," she said again. "But don't say I didn't warn you. It gets messy from here." The storm decided then that it wasn't finished with us. The rain, which had been a steady drumming, intensified into a torrential assault. It hammered against the corrugated metal of the roof with such violence that the world outside ceased to exist. We were sealed inside a concrete box, the humidity rising until the air felt thick enough to taste. It was a heavy, wet heat that clung to my skin, making my silk blouse stick uncomfortably to my back. My hair, usually disciplined into a sleek curtain, began to rebel against the dampness, a loss of control that irritated me more than the trapped car. Sam had gone out to the truck to retrieve the track, returning a moment later drenched. The water darkened the shoulders of her jacket to a deep charcoal and plastered her bangs to her forehead. She didn't shake it off like a dog. She just slicked her hair back with a gloved hand, sending a spray of droplets onto the concrete. The action was unselfconscious and raw. I found myself staring at the path of a single drop of water as it traced the line of her jaw and disappeared into the collar of her thermal shirt. I wondered, with a sudden, jarring impropriety, if her skin was cold under those layers, or if the exertion had kept her warm. "The mounting bracket is bent," she announced, her voice raising slightly to cut through the noise of the rain. She dropped a heavy steel rail onto the floor. "I have to grind it down before I can mount the new track. If I don't, the roller will catch." "How long?" I asked. It was the only question I seemed capable of asking. "As long as it takes to make it smooth," she replied, not looking up. She sat on a low, overturned crate, bracing the steel rail between her knees. She pulled a metal file from her bag. Scritch, scritch, scritch. The sound was maddening. It was slow, rhythmic, and agonizingly deliberate. In my world, friction was a failure of management. If things ground together, you fired someone or threw money at the problem until it smoothed out. You didn't sit on a crate and file it down by hand. I paced the length of the garage, my heels clicking a frantic staccato against the epoxy, a high-pitched counter rhythm to her steady filing. I checked my phone. No signal. The storm had scrambled the reception. I was cut off. My calendar, my emails, my lifeline to the city, all severed. "You're going to wear a groove in the floor," Sam said. She had stopped filing. She was watching me, her hands resting on the steel rail, her legs spread to balance the weight. "I can't just sit here," I said, turning to face her. "I have responsibilities. I can't control this." I gestured wildly at the door, the rain. "And I hate it." "That's the problem," Sam said, her voice calm, infuriatingly grounded. "You think you can schedule chaos. But the storm doesn't care about your board meeting, Layla. The steel doesn't care about your quarterly projections." "I care," I snapped, folding my arms tight across my chest, holding myself together. "I know you do," she said softly. She stood up, abandoning the rail. She took a step toward me, wiping her hands on her thighs. The movement drew my eyes to the strength in her legs, the solid way she connected with the ground. "But you're carrying it all right here." She reached out, her hand hovering for a second before she tapped her own trapezius muscle, mirroring me. "Your shoulders are up around your ears. Your jaw is locked so tight I can see the muscle jumping. You're trying to hold the roof up by yourself." I wanted to tell her to back off. I wanted to tell her she was the help, and she had no right to analyze my posture or my psyche. But the words died in my throat, because she was right. My jaw ached. My neck was a knot of tension that had been tightening for 10 years. Being seen, truly seen, by this stranger in dirty canvas felt like a violation and a relief all at once. "I don't know how to put it down," I whispered, the admission slipping out before I could check it. Sam looked at me, her dark eyes traveling over my face, stripping away the title and the salary and the attitude. "You just let it drop," she said. "Gravity does the rest." She held my gaze, and for a second, the sound of the rain faded. The air between us charged, heavy with the smell of wet wool and ozone. I felt a pull, a terrifying urge to step forward into the space she was occupying. Then the garage lights flickered. Once, twice. A loud pop echoed from the breaker box, and the world went black. The hum of the refrigerator died. The overhead fluorescence vanished. We were plunged into a darkness so complete, it felt like the house had swallowed us whole, leaving nothing but the sound of the rain and the sudden, sharp intake of Sam's breath in the dark. The darkness was absolute. It didn't just remove the light, it removed the dimensions of the room. The sterile white walls, the high ceiling, the organized shelves, all the markers of my controlled environment vanished, leaving us suspended in a void where the only reality was the sound of the rain and the proximity of another human being. For a moment, the corporate hierarchy that governed my life dissolved. In the dark, there was no homeowner and service provider. There were just two women breathing the same humid, recycled air. I stood frozen, my hands clutching my elbows, disoriented by the sudden blindness. I heard the rustle of canvas, the heavy scrape of a boot on concrete, and then a mechanical click. A beam of white light sliced through the gloom, sharp and deliberate. It didn't illuminate the whole room. It created a vignette, a small, focused stage of existence carved out of the shadows. Sam was holding a heavy-duty work light, the beam pointing up, casting her face in stark relief. The angles of her cheekbones were exaggerated by the shadows, her eyes deep pools of dark intelligence. She looked like a Caravaggio painting come to life in a suburban garage, raw, dramatic, and compelling. "The breaker for the garage is on a sub-panel," she said, her voice sounding closer than I expected. "It probably tripped when the humidity spiked. I can't reset it without going outside, and I'm not leaving this track half-ground." She stood up, the light moving with her, sending wild, swinging shadows across the ceiling. She walked toward me, and I didn't back away. I couldn't. The darkness outside her circle of light felt hostile, while the space she occupied felt warm. "I can't hold the light and the file at the same time," she said, extending the handle toward me. "I need hands." It wasn't a request. It was a deployment of resources. I reached out, my manicured fingers brushing against her gloved ones as I took the heavy, rubberized grip. The transfer of the object felt significant, like accepting a weapon or a secret. "Aim it at the bottom bracket," she instructed, dropping to one knee. I stepped closer, invading the radius of her warmth. The heat radiating off her was palpable, distilled by the lamp and the closeness of our bodies. It was intoxicating. I directed the beam where she pointed, my hand trembling slightly. The light illuminated her hands as she worked, the file moving with a rhythmic shh, shh against the steel. I watched the tendons in her forearms flex, the way the veins stood out against her skin, a map of capability that I wanted to trace. She wasn't just fixing a door. She was reshaping the world with her hands, forcing the metal to yield to her will. "You live in this fortress alone?" she asked, not looking up. The question was casual, but in the intimacy of the spotlight, it felt probing. "It's not a fortress," I defended, though the word felt hollow. "It's a smart home. It's efficient." "It's quiet," she countered, blowing metal filings off the bracket. The dust sparkled in the light like diamond dust before settling on her boots. "Too quiet. You can hear the house settling. You can hear the clocks ticking. It feels like a waiting room." "I like the quiet," I lied. "I need focus. My life is loud." "Your job is loud," Sam corrected. She paused, looking up at me. From her kneeling position, her face was level with my waist. She tilted her head back, exposing the long, elegant line of her throat. The light caught a bead of sweat tracking down her neck, disappearing into the collar of her shirt. I felt a phantom sensation in my fingertips, a desire to catch that drop before it fell. "Your life looks pretty empty from where I'm sitting. No pictures on the walls in here, no bikes, no garden tools, just a clean floor and a German car." "I'm a minimalist," I said, the defense weak. "You're lonely," she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a diagnostic observation, delivered with the same factual tone she used to describe the torsion spring. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to tell her she was crossing a line. But the anger wouldn't come. Instead, I felt a crack in the porcelain shell I wore. She was right. The house was a box I stored myself in between meetings. "Aim lower," she murmured. leaning in to inspect the track. I adjusted the light, stepping forward to get a better angle. My knee brushed against her shoulder. It was a solid, warm contact. She didn't pull away. She leaned into it, just a fraction of an inch, grounding herself against me. The physical space between us had shrunk to nothing. I was standing over her, holding the light that allowed her to see, and she was anchored against my leg, a solid weight in a world that felt increasingly untethered. The air between us thickened, charged with the static of the storm and the unspoken truth that we were the only two real things in the dark. I stepped back, severing the physical connection between my knee and her shoulder. The withdrawal felt violent, a sudden loss of heat that left my skin prickling in the damp air. The moment of vulnerability in the dark had been seductive, but the reality of my situation crashed back in with the force of the thunder overhead. I checked my watch, angling the beam of the work light until the glare hit the crystal face. 9:15 a.m. "They've started," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "The meeting has started. They're looking at the empty chair at the head of the table, and they're wondering if I finally cracked." The panic wasn't a slow creep. It was an ambush. My chest tightened, a band of iron constricting my lungs. I looked at the Audi, sitting uselessly on its tires, a sleek silver prisoner. It represented everything I was failing to control: my schedule, my mobility, my image. I started to spiral, the air in the garage feeling suddenly too thin to support life. I paced away from Sam, the beam of the light swinging wildly, illuminating flashes of the ceiling, the floor, the tool bag. "I need to get out," I said, my voice rising, cracking on the last syllable. "I can't be trapped in here. I have to call them. I have to—" "Layla." Sam didn't shout. She didn't have to. Her voice was a low rumble that cut underneath the frequency of my panic. She stood up, unfolding her height from the crouch, and moved into my path. She didn't touch me, not yet, but she used her body as a breakwater, forcing me to stop my frantic pacing or collide with her. "You're redlining," she said, her eyes catching the erratic beam of the light I was clutching. "You're pushing too much voltage through a system that's already overloaded. You're going to burn out the circuits." "I don't have a choice," I snapped, trying to step around her. "You don't understand. If I'm not there to defend the budget, Sterling will gut it. 10 months of work, gone, because a spring snapped." "So let him gut it," Sam said, blocking me again. She was immovable, a wall of calm in the center of my storm. "It's just money. It's just a meeting. You're vibrating so hard I can hear your teeth chattering." "I am not vibrating," I lied, though the light in my hand was trembling, casting a jittery strobe effect against her chest. "Give me the light," she said softly. She reached out. She didn't snatch it. She moved with a slow, deliberate gravity. Her hand covered mine on the rubberized grip of the work light. Her palm was broad, warm, and incredibly rough. The calluses on her fingers were hard ridges against the soft, manicured skin of my hand. It wasn't a gentle touch. It was a claiming. The contact was an electric shock, but not the painful kind. It was the sudden, jarring sensation of a live wire finally finding a ground. The chaotic energy that had been whipping through my nervous system suddenly had somewhere to go. It poured out of me and into her, absorbed by her solid stance, her steady breathing, her absolute refusal to be rattled. I froze. I stared at our hands, mine pale and shaking, hers dark with grease and steady as stone. The contrast was stark, almost obscene in its intimacy. I felt the heat of her skin seeping into mine, thawing the cold panic in my veins. "You're running hot," she murmured, her thumb brushing against the inside of my wrist, right over the pulse point that was hammering a frantic rhythm. "You need to ground yourself before you spark." "I don't know how," I breathed, the fight draining out of me, replaced by a heavy, languid awareness of her proximity. "Stop trying to hold the roof up," she said, her fingers tightening slightly over mine, taking the weight of the light. "The house is built to stand on its own. You built a life that falls apart if one mechanical part fails. That's not strength, Layla. That's just a different kind of trap. Perfection is a cage." "It's control," I whispered, though the argument felt weak even to my own ears. "It's fear," she corrected, her voice dropping to a rasp that raised the hair on my arms. "Real control, is knowing you can handle the mess when it happens. It's knowing you can stand in the dark and not break. She gently pried my fingers off the light. As her hand left mine, I felt a phantom ache, a sudden coolness where her heat had been. She turned the light away from us, aiming it back at the track, breaking the spell but leaving the air between us thick and charged. Outside, the hammering of the rain began to slow. The relentless roar faded into a steady, rhythmic patter. The storm was breaking, the atmospheric pressure dropping, but inside the garage, the pressure had only risen. The panic was gone, but it had been replaced by a different kind of tension, a hunger that had nothing to do with board meetings, and everything to do with the woman standing in the shadows, holding the light. "The track is straight," Sam announced, her voice slightly rougher than before, though whether from the dust or the intimacy of the last few minutes, I couldn't tell. She stood up, kicking the plastic chocks away from the wheels with the toe of her boot. "But the opener is disconnected. I need to lift the door manually to check the balance. If the spring tension is wrong, the motor will burn out in a month." She walked to the center of the garage door, gripping the lift handle. It was a heavy, insulated steel door, a double-width barrier designed to keep the world out. Without the mechanical assist of the motor, it was 300 pounds of dead weight. "You might want to step back," she said, not looking at me this time. "I need room to work." I retreated toward the Audi, leaning my hip against the cool metal of the fender, crossing my arms. I told myself I was inspecting her work. I told myself I was ensuring the safety of my property. But as Sam widened her stance, planting those heavy boots firmly on the concrete, I knew I was lying. I was an audience of one, waiting for the performance. She squatted low, her thighs straining against the canvas of her pants. She didn't just pull, she engaged her entire body, a kinetic chain of leverage and power. As she began to lift, exhaling a sharp, controlled breath, the thermal shirt she wore pulled taut across her back. I watched the muscles shift and bunch underneath the fabric, a topography of effort that fascinated me. It was raw, unapologetic strength. In my world, power was static. It was signatures on contracts, silence in boardrooms, the subtle tilt of a head. Here, power was dynamic. It was sweat and torque and the ability to move immovable objects. The door groaned, the rollers protesting in the new track, but it rose. Sam rose with it, her body uncoiling. Her biceps flexed, hard and defined, as she guided the heavy steel panels upward. I found my gaze snagging on the details, the way a vein in her forearm swelled with the exertion, the way her shirt rode up again to reveal that sliver of pale skin at her waist, the way her neck flushed with heat. I wasn't hiding it anymore. I was staring. I wondered what it would feel like to be held with that kind of strength, to be lifted and moved and handled with that same mix of roughness and precision. Sam held the door at chest height, testing the balance. The spring was doing some of the work, but she was controlling the rest. She was holding the weight of the wall between us. Then she froze. She didn't turn her head. She didn't speak. She just held the door steady, her muscles trembling slightly with the effort. Directly in front of her, the dark glass of the garage door's upper window acted as a mirror against the gloom of the storm outside. In that reflection, our eyes met. She could see me leaning against the car. She could see the hunger I hadn't bothered to wipe off my face. The air in the garage thickened, turning viscous and heavy. The sound of the rain faded into a dull thrum, drowned out by the sudden, deafening volume of the eye contact. She didn't look away. She didn't look embarrassed. In the reflection, her dark eyes narrowed slightly, assessing me, reading the desire written plainly on my features. She held the weight of the door as if it were nothing, prolonging the moment, letting the tension stretch until it hummed like a high-voltage line. She knew, and she liked it. Slowly, deliberately, she finished the lift, pushing the door all the way up until it locked into the horizontal tracks. The garage was suddenly open to the gray light of the storm, but neither of us looked outside. She turned around, her chest heaving, a sheen of sweat coating her face. "It balances," she said, her voice husky. She wiped her forehead with her forearm, leaving a smudge of grease near her temple. "I need a towel and water, unless you want me dripping on your floor." Leading Sam into my kitchen felt like inviting a wolf into a waiting room. The transition from the concrete dampness of the garage to the climate-controlled precision of the main house was jarring. My heels clicked sharply on the hardwood, a familiar, authoritative sound, but it was drowned out by the heavy, deliberate thud of Sam's boots behind me. She didn't tiptoe. She didn't try to minimize her impact on my floors. She walked with the confidence of someone who knew that dirt could be cleaned, but presence couldn't be faked. The kitchen was a cathedral of Calicotta marble and stainless steel, a space designed for catering crews and photo shoots rather than actual cooking. It was blindingly white. Sam stood in the center of it, a dark, gritty anomaly in her charcoal canvas and stained thermal shirt. She looked around, not with awe, but with a critical architectural eye. "You have a lot of white," she observed, her voice sounding too loud in the acoustic perfection of the room. Brave choice. Or maybe just a dangerous one. "It's clean," I said, moving to the fridge. "I like clean." "Clean hides nothing," Sam countered. She walked to the island, resting a hand on the cool marble. Even that simple gesture felt loaded. Her hand was dark with grease, a stark violation of the pristine stone. She pulled it back, leaving a faint, ghostly smudge. She looked at it, then at me, a challenge in her raised eyebrow. "See? I leave a mark." I poured a glass of water, the ice cracking loudly, and set it on the counter. "The sink is there. There's soap." I leaned against the refrigerator, the cold stainless steel pressing through my silk blouse, and watched her. It was a domestic act, washing hands, but watching Sam do it felt voyeuristic. She rolled up her sleeves, exposing forearms that were corded with muscle and mapped with the history of her work. She turned on the faucet, and I watched the water cascade over her hands. She didn't wash quickly. She took the bar of expensive lemon-scented soap, a ridiculous decorative thing I never touched, and worked it into a lather. I watched the foam turn gray, the grease and oil of the repair lifting away from her skin. It swirled into the drain, a dark vortex in the white porcelain. There was an intimacy to it, seeing the layers of the job stripped away to reveal the person underneath. "You have scars," I said softly. It wasn't a question. Sam rinsed her hands, the water running clear now. She shook them off, droplets flying onto the marble, before reaching for the towel I offered. She dried them slowly, inspecting her knuckles. "Hazards of the trade," she said, tracing a jagged white line that ran across the back of her left hand. "Torsion spring slipped 3 years ago. Missed the artery by an inch. It's a good reminder." "Of what?" "That tension is dangerous," she said, looking up at me. Her eyes were dark, unreadable. "That if you don't respect the stored energy, it'll cut you open." I felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She wasn't talking about the door anymore. She tossed the towel onto the counter. It was ruined, stained with the remnants of the grease, and picked up the water glass. She drank the whole thing in one long pull, her throat working. I watched the movement, mesmerized by the raw, unrefined thirst. She set the glass down with a solid clink. "You're staring again," she said. Her voice was lower now, stripped of the professional veneer she had worn in the garage. "I'm observing," I corrected, pushing off the fridge. I walked toward the island, stopping safely on the other side. "You're not asking me to leave," Sam said, leaning forward, resting her clean elbows on the marble. She invaded my space without moving her feet. "You're not checking your email. You're standing there, watching me wash my hands like it's the most interesting thing that's happened in this kitchen in years." "Maybe it is," I admitted. The truth slipped out, reckless and unbidden. "You brought the storm inside." "Things break," Sam said, her gaze dropping to my mouth for a fraction of a second before returning to my eyes. "That's how you know they're real. If it never breaks, it's just decoration. You want a life that works, Layla, or do you just want a life that looks good in a brochure?" The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. She saw right through the marble and the silk and the board meetings. She saw the fatigue I hid under concealer and the loneliness I hid under minimalism. "I don't know if I can tell the difference anymore," I whispered. Sam smiled, a slow, genuine expression that softened the hard angles of her face. "That's why you hired a mechanic," she said softly. "We're good at diagnostics." She pushed off the counter, the moment breaking, but the connection holding firm. "I need to calibrate the travel limits on the opener. It's the last step. Once I set it, the door closes, the seal holds, and I'm gone. You can have your fortress back. I'm not sure I want it back, I said. Sam paused. She looked at me, her expression shifting from amused to something hungrier, something more dangerous. Careful, Layla. You keep talking like that, and I might think you're asking me to break something else just so I have to stay and fix it. Maybe I am, I breathed. Let's finish the door, she said, her voice rough, before we start fixing things that aren't broken yet. Returning to the garage felt less like re-entering a workspace and more like stepping into a pressure vessel. The air had cooled, the humidity dropping as the storm outside finally exhausted itself into a steady, rhythmic drizzle. But inside, the temperature felt artificially high. The silence I had previously dreaded now felt conspiratorial, a heavy blanket wrapped around the two of us that muffled the outside world and amplified the sound of our breathing. Sam moved directly to the center of the room, positioning the ladder under the torsion spring assembly with a sharp, metallic clatter. She didn't look at me. She was all business again, or at least she was trying to be. She pulled a pair of winding bars from her bag, 2 solid steel rods, heavy and scarred from use. This is the dangerous part, she said, her back to me as she climbed the first 2 rungs. I have to fine-tune the tension to balance the new track weight. If I slip, the bar spins. It can break a wrist. Or a jaw. So stay back. It was a warning, professional and clear. An hour ago, I would have retreated to the safety of the door frame. I would have checked my phone. I would have protected myself. But the woman who needed safety had dissolved, somewhere between the dark of the power outage and the heat of the kitchen. I didn't step back. I stepped forward. I walked until I was standing almost directly at the foot of the ladder. I could smell the leather of her boots, the faint chemical scent of the floor epoxy, and the overwhelming, grounding smell of her. I crossed my arms, not to close myself off, but to keep my hands from shaking. I leaned my shoulder against the vertical track she had just installed, claiming my space in her work zone. I trust you, I said. My voice was low, barely a whisper, but in the quiet garage, it carried. Sam paused. Her hand tightened on the steel winding bar she had just inserted into the spring cone. She didn't look down, but I saw the muscles in her back seize, a sudden stillness in the constant motion of her work. She took a breath, held it, and then pushed the bar up, winding the spring a quarter turn. The metal groaned, a sound of immense stored energy resisting the force of her arm. I watched a bead of sweat gather at her temple, sliding slowly down her cheek, over the sharp line of her jaw, and hanging precariously there before dropping onto her collarbone. I let my eyes linger on her hands, gripping the steel bars with a white-knuckled intensity. I imagined those hands, rough and scarred, on something softer, on silk, on skin. Sam inserted the second bar, holding the tension with one hand while she prepared to turn it again. It was a moment of critical balance. She was fully extended, vulnerable to the physics of the spring. Then she stopped. She didn't finish the turn. She didn't lock the set screw. She just froze, suspended in the act of exertion. The winding bar stayed motionless in her grip. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, the rhythm of her breathing syncing with the pounding of my own heart. The silence stretched, thin and taut as a wire about to snap. "Layla," she rasped. She didn't look down. She was staring straight ahead at the wall, her knuckles bleaching white on the steel. "Yes," I answered, and I heard the challenge in my own voice. "You need to stop looking at me like that." She turned her head then, looking down at me from her perch. Her eyes were dark, blown wide, the pupils swallowing the iris. There was no professional distance left. There was only heat. "I can't focus," she admitted, the words torn out of her. "And if I can't focus, this spring is going to take my head off." It was the opening I had been waiting for. The admission that I wasn't the only one spiraling. The confirmation that the current ran both ways. "Then come down," I said. I didn't move. I didn't retreat to give her space. I stayed right there, an obstruction, a distraction, a demand. "If you can't focus on the door, Sam, then stop working on the door." She looked at me, really looked at me, searching for any sign of hesitation, any flicker of the corporate homeowner who wanted her schedule back. She found none. She saw only the woman who had stood in the dark with her, the woman who had watched her wash her hands, the woman who was tired of being safe. Slowly, with agonizing care, she let the tension off the spring. She removed the winding bars, sliding them into her belt with a heavy clank. She locked the cone in place, securing the danger, but leaving the tension in the room unresolved. She descended the ladder. 1 step. 2. Her boots hit the concrete, and she turned to face me. She didn't back away. She dropped the heavy steel bars onto the workbench, the sound of the metal hitting wood like a gavel bringing a sentence down. The work was abandoned. The barrier was gone. Sam turned fully. The heavy steel bars lay on the bench between us, discarded artifacts of a job that suddenly felt miles away. The professional mask she had worn, the one made of technical jargon and blue-collar deferentiality, dropped completely. What was left underneath was raw, unpolished hunger. She stood with her weight settled on her heels, her chest rising and falling in a rhythm that matched my own, her dark eyes stripping away the blazer, the silk, and the title, until I felt entirely exposed. She didn't apologize for the outburst. She didn't retreat. She simply closed the distance between us, her boots scuffing heavily against the concrete. The sound was a final punctuation mark on the sentence of our professional relationship. "You're not scared of the tension," she observed, her voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. "You're just scared of what happens when it releases." "I'm terrified," I admitted, the breath catching in my throat. I didn't back up. I couldn't. The gravity she generated was too strong. But I'm not running. She reached out. Her hand was a landscape of her labor, stained with grease, scarred from the metal, rough as unfinished wood. I didn't flinch. I didn't think about the dry cleaning bill or the meeting or the propriety of the moment. I leaned into the space she offered. Then she traced it. Her thumb, calloused and hard, found the tight, aching line of my jaw. She pressed down, not gently, but with the firm, knowing pressure of someone who understands mechanics. She traced the path of the tension I had been carrying since I was 22, following the muscle from the hinge of my jaw down to the hollow of my throat. The sensation was electric. The roughness of her skin against my expensive, moisturized face was a shock to the system, a gritty reality checking against my soft, curated life. It scraped against my nerves in the most exquisite way, grounding me in the physical moment. "You hold it all right here," she whispered, her thumb resting over the pulse hammering frantically against my carotid artery. "Like you're waiting for a blow that never comes." "Make it stop," I breathed, my eyes fluttering shut as the friction of her touch sent a jolt of heat straight to my chest. "I can't fix the world, Layla. I'm just a mechanic." "Then fix this." She didn't hesitate. She stepped into me, her thigh knocking solidly against mine, claiming the space. Her other hand found the small of my back, heavy and warm through the wool of my blazer. The kiss wasn't a question. It was an answer. It tasted of rain, coffee, and the metallic tang of the work she'd just finished. It wasn't soft or polite. It was heavy, demanding, and inevitable. I felt the armor dissolve. The blazer, the schedule, the board meeting, they all evaporated in the heat of her mouth. I wrapped my arms around her neck, my fingers tangling in her damp hair, pulling her closer, anchoring myself to the only solid thing in the storm. The dampness of her clothes seeped into my silk blouse, ruining it, and I didn't care. I wanted the stain. I wanted the evidence that I had finally let something messy into my life. For a moment, the garage narrowed down to the pressure of her mouth and the unyielding strength of her body against mine. The spring inside me, the one I had wound so tight for so long, finally snapped. Not with violence, but with a release that flooded my veins with relief. When we finally broke apart, gasping, our foreheads resting against each other, the silence in the garage had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full. "The door is fixed," Sam murmured against my skin, her thumb still stroking the line of my jaw. "You can leave." I looked at the silver Audi, then back at the woman, whose grease was now smudged on my cheek. "I know," I said, leaning back into her touch. "But I'm not going anywhere." Sam reached past me and hit the wall button. The motor hummed, a smooth, healthy sound. The heavy steel door rose, revealing the driveway bathed in the gray, washed-out light of the storm's aftermath. The way out was open. I could drive to the city. I could save the meeting. Instead, I reached for Sam's hand, interlacing my clean fingers with her dirty ones, and turned my back on the open door. The circuit was closed. If you've ever found the ground wire in the middle of a storm, subscribe for more stories.